The snow had been falling for 3 days when they came to take the farm. Wren heard them before she saw them, the creak of wagon wheels on the frozen track, the low murmur of men who had already decided how things would go. She was standing at the window with Lily pressed against her hip. The child's small fist wrapped around a fistful of Wren's skirt, and she did not move. She had learned, in the 14 months since Thomas died, that moving too quickly made you look afraid. And afraid women in Coldwater Flats got eaten alive. There were 3 of them. Silas Pruett walked in front, because Silas Pruett always walked in front, and behind him came 2 men. Wren didn't know. Broad-shouldered, blank-faced, the kind of men who did what they were paid to do and slept fine afterwards. Silas had a piece of paper in his hand. He always had a piece of paper. That was how he did it. Quietly, legally, with paper. Wren opened the door before they knocked. Mrs. Calloway, Silas pulled his hat brim down against the wind. "You know why I'm here. Thomas borrowed $80, she said. I know what he borrowed. 83, with interest, and the note came due the 15th. He held out the paper. She didn't take it. I've been patient, Mrs. Calloway. I think you'd agree I've been more than patient. Lily pressed harder into Wren's side. The child was 4 years old and had her father's eyes, and her father's habit of going very still when she was frightened. Wren put her hand on top of Lily's head without looking down. Give me until spring, Wren said. Silas made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I gave you until December. It's January. I have the cow. I don't want the cow. He folded the paper, put it back in his coat. I want the land, Mrs. Calloway. That was always going to be the end of it. Thomas understood it when he signed. He just thought he'd be around to. He stopped, had the decency at least to stop. You have until morning to take what you can carry. My men will be back at first light. He turned and walked back to the wagon. His men followed. The snow swallowed the sound of them. Wren stood in the doorway until they were gone, and then she stood there a little longer, because she did not know what else to do. The cold came in around her ankles. Lily's fist was still clenched in her skirt. Mama, Lily said. I know, Wren said. I know, sweetheart. She had nowhere to go. That was the truth of it, plain as the empty road and the grey sky and the $83 she did not have. Her parents were in Ontario, 3 days' travel in good weather, and this was not good weather. The neighbours closest, the Fenwick family, a mile east, had their own winter to survive, and Silas Pruett owned half the men in Coldwater Flats anyway, one way or another. She put Lily to bed early and sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's ledger open in front of her, and she did the numbers again, the way she'd been doing them for weeks, as if this time they might come out different. They didn't. The cow was worth maybe $12. The furniture, the tools, the seed she'd been saving. Another 15, if she was lucky. If she found someone willing to buy in January, which she wouldn't. There was no version of these numbers that came out to 83. She closed the ledger, pressed her palms flat against the cover. Outside, the wind had picked up. She could hear it, finding every gap in the walls. Thomas hadn't gotten around to fixing, and she thought about how she had believed last spring that there would be time to fix the walls, time to plant the east field, time to do all the things that were supposed to happen after the first hard year. Thomas had believed it too. That was the cruelest part. He had believed it right up until the moment the horse threw him, and then there was no more time for anyone. She went to bed. She didn't sleep. At some point deep in the night, Lily cried out, and Wren was across the hall before she was fully awake, gathering the child, shushing her. Lily's forehead was warm. Not dangerous warm, just the particular warmth of a child who had absorbed a frightening day and was working it out in her sleep. It's all right, Wren whispered, rocking her. It's all right. I've got you. She sat there in the dark holding her daughter, and she thought about what all right might look like now. She was 28 years old. She had $6 in the tin on the shelf above the stove, and a child with her dead father's eyes, and a farm that would be gone by morning. She thought, Thomas, what do I do? She thought it the way she'd been thinking it for 14 months, already knowing there would be no answer. The answer didn't come from Thomas. It came 2 hours before dawn, in the sound of a horse moving on the track outside. One horse. Moving slow and deliberate in the dark, the way an animal moves when its rider knows exactly where he's going. Wren set Lily down carefully, went to the window. The moon had broken through the clouds and laid a stripe of silver across the snow, and in that light she could see a man on horseback coming up the track. Alone, riding a horse that was big enough to carry him, and he was large, in a way that registered even at distance, even through a frosted window in the middle of the night. Shoulders like a crossbeam, a coat that had been repaired so many times it had forgotten what it originally was. She should have been frightened. She probably was frightened. But there was something in the way he rode, unhurried, steady, like the cold and the dark, were things he'd made his peace with long ago, that kept her feet rooted rather than reaching for the rifle above the door. He stopped outside, didn't come to the door, just sat on his horse and seemed to be looking at the house, and after a long moment he got down and went to the barn, and she heard the barn door open and close. Wren stood at the window for another 10 minutes. Then she lit a lamp, put on her coat, and went outside. The cold hit her like a wall. She crossed the yard with the lamp held up, pushed open the barn door, and found him in the far corner with her cow, crouched down, doing something she couldn't immediately see. He heard the door. She knew he heard it, but he didn't turn around. "What are you doing?" she said. "Her front left," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "She's been favoring it. Probably 3-4 days." Wren came closer. He was wrapping the cow's leg with a strip of something. Cloth, clean cloth, which meant he'd come prepared for this, which meant he'd known. She looked at the back of his head. Dark hair going grey at the edges. Hands that were careful despite their size. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No," he agreed. "I don't know who you are." He tied off the wrapping and stood up, and she understood then why the horse was the size it was. He was taller than Thomas had been, and broader, and his face in the lamplight was weathered down to its essentials. Nothing extra, nothing soft. Eyes that were a color she couldn't quite name in the low light. He looked at her with an expression that was not unfriendly but was also not warm, the way a man looks when he has learned to spend his warmth carefully. "Emmett," he said. She waited for more. He didn't offer it. "Why are you here, Emmett?" He glanced around the barn, at the cow with her wrapped leg, at the stack of hay that was lower than it should be this early in winter, at the roof where there was a gap above the north corner that had been letting in weather. "Silas Pruitt sent word to a few people," he said, "about the farm, about you having to leave. He sent word." The words came out flat. He told people before he even... She stopped, breathed. Why would he do that? Because he wants to sell the land fast, and he wants to make sure you don't find anyone willing to help you before morning. Emmett looked at her. "He doesn't know I'm here." The lamp swayed slightly in her hand. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, just the quiet of a man who doesn't say things until he knows what he means. "I have a place," he said, "up the mountain. About 4 miles. It's not," he paused, seemed to be choosing words with care. "It's not what you're used to, but it's warm. It holds against winter, and Silas Pruitt doesn't own anything up that high." Wren stared at him. "You're a stranger," she said. "Yes. You're asking me to take my daughter and go up a mountain with a man I've never met. I'm asking you to consider it," he said. "You don't have to decide right now. His men come at first light." "I know." She looked at him for a long time. He didn't look away, but he didn't push either. There was something in that, the not pushing, that she noticed. "Why?" she said. "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" Something moved through his face. Not quite pain, not quite anything she had a name for. "I knew Thomas," he said. "Not well. He helped me out of a bad spot 2 winters ago. He never asked for anything in return. He glanced down at his hands. "I heard you were in trouble." Seemed like the kind of thing he would have wanted someone to do. The wind pushed against the barn door. The cow moved in her corner, her wrapped leg held carefully off the ground. Wren thought about the tin above the stove with $6 in it. She thought about Lily's warm forehead and her father's eyes. She thought about Silas Pruett, walking up this track in a few hours with his paper and his patient face, and his 2 blank-faced men. "We'd need to take the cow," she said. Emmett nodded. "And Lily can't walk 4 miles in this cold." "She can ride," he said. "I'll lead the horse." Wren set down the lamp on a fence post. She crossed her arms against the cold and looked at this large, quiet scum in the middle of the night to wrap her cow's leg and offer her the only way out she had. "All right," she said. They left before the sky started to lighten. Wren wrapped Lily in every blanket they had, and Emmett lifted the child onto the horse without being asked, settling her in the saddle with a steadiness that told Wren he'd done something like this before, handled something small and fragile with those big, careful hands. Lily looked at him with her wide, solemn eyes, and then leaned forward and pressed her cheek against the horse's neck, and that was that. Wren took the cow's lead. Emmett walked beside the horse. They went up the track in the dark without speaking, the snow creaking under their feet. Once Lily said, "Where are we going?" Emmett answered before Wren could. "Up," he said. Lily seemed to find this sufficient. She closed her eyes. The trail climbed through stands of spruce, so thick they blocked the wind, and for stretches at a time the world went quiet. Just the horses breathing, and the cows plodding, and the sound of their feet on the packed snow. Emmett moved ahead when the trail narrowed, breaking the path, and Wren followed in the space he made. She watched his back and thought about Thomas, about who Thomas had known, about the 2 winters ago that she hadn't been part of yet. She wondered what bad spot. She didn't ask. The cabin appeared through the trees without warning. She looked up, and it was simply there, low and solid and dark-roofed, banked with snow on 3 sides in a way that looked deliberate, smoke coming from the chimney. He'd left the fire burning then. He'd been planning to come for her before he came. That landed somewhere in her chest in a way she wasn't expecting. The inside was 1 room, bigger than it looked from outside. A table, 2 chairs, a sleeping platform along the east wall with a rolled blanket on it, a stove that was putting out real heat. The walls were solid. She could see they were solid, chinked carefully, no light coming through. Pots hung from the rafters, a shelf of things that were more than a bachelor's provisions, dried herbs, a row of jars, what looked like a small library of 3 or 4 books held upright by a rock on each side. Lily was asleep on her feet. Emmett took her gently, just reached out, and gathered her, and laid her on the sleeping platform, tucked the blanket around her. He did it so naturally that Wren didn't think to object until it was already done, and then she didn't object at all. She stood in the middle of the room with her hands still cold, and her chest still tight with the morning and everything in it, and she said, "Thank you." Emmett was at the stove, doing something with a pot. He didn't turn around. "Get warm," he said. She sat in one of the chairs and got warm. The first days were strange. She didn't know what she was in this place. Not a guest, exactly, not a lodger. Emmett treated her with a kind of steady courtesy that had no category she recognized. He was not warm, but he was not cold. He was not generous, but he lacked nothing. He did not talk much, but when he spoke it was to say something that mattered. He gave her and Lily the sleeping platform, and made his bed by the stove, and he never once mentioned it. So after a while, she stopped mentioning it either. She learned his rhythms, the way you learn the rhythms of a place, more than a person. He woke before light. He came back for the midday meal and ate without hurry, and went back out. He came back at dark with whatever the day had produced. Firewood, game, once a length of something she couldn't identify that turned out to be a repair for the roof. He fixed things. That was the base unit of who he was. He saw what needed fixing. And he fixed it, and he did not make a ceremony of it. Lily watched him the way children watch things they're still deciding about. She didn't talk to him for the first 4 days. On the 5th day she appeared at his elbow while he was splitting wood and said, very seriously, "You're doing it wrong." Emmett stopped splitting wood. He looked at her. "Am I? My papa did it different. How'd your papa do it?" Lily took the hatchet that was leaning against the block, the small one, which Wren realized he had left there in range of a child's hands, which meant he had already thought about this, and demonstrated a technique that bore no particular relationship to it efficient wood splitting, but was performed with great conviction. Emmett watched in the same way he watched everything, with his full attention, and without hurry. "I see," he said. "It's better," Lily said. "Might be," he said, and went back to splitting, and Lily stood beside him and supervised, and that was the end of her 5 days of silence. Wren watched from the doorway, and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't look at too closely. The trouble came on a Thursday. She heard horses on the lower trail, too many for a casual passing, too deliberate in their pace, and Emmett heard them at the same time. He came out of the lean-to, where he'd been working, and stood very still for a moment, with his head angled the way an animal goes still when it's gauging something. "Inside," he said to Lily. Lily went, because something in his voice was different. Wren went to stand beside him. There were 4 of them coming up the trail, and she recognized the man in front. Not Silas Pruitt himself, but one of his men, the taller of the 2 blank-faced ones, and with him a man in a town coat, who was not built for mountain travel, and was showing it in every stiff-kneed step his horse took. They stopped at the edge of the clearing. "That's Wrenner," the blank-faced man said, and he meant Emmett. It took Wren a moment to understand that Wrenner was Emmett's last name. "We're looking for the Calloway woman and her girl." Emmett said nothing. "Pruitt says she took some items from the property that weren't hers to take. The cow was mine," Wren said. The man in the town coat shifted on his horse. "Be that as it may, the cow's registered in my name," she said. "Thomas registered it 3 years ago. You can check the records in town." There was a silence. The blank-faced man and the town coat looked at each other. "The property itself is Pruitt's," Emmett said. His voice was very even. "She knows that. The property's his, the cow's hers, the girl's hers, and they're on my land now, which is not Pruitt's, and has not been Pruitt's, and will not be Pruitt's." He looked at the blank-faced man with no particular expression. "Is there something else?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Pruitt's not going to like this," the blank-faced man said. "No," Emmett agreed. They left, not quickly. They left at the same deliberate pace they'd arrived, taking their time about it the way men do when they want to make it clear that leaving was their own decision. Wren stood beside Emmett until the sound of the horses was gone, and then stood there a while longer. "Wrenner," she said. "Emmett Wrenner," he said. "You let me call you just Emmett for 3 weeks. You didn't ask." She looked at him. He was watching the place where the trees had closed behind the riders, and his jaw was set in a way she was learning to read, the way she was learning all of him. Not quickly, not all at once, but in the accumulation of small moments. "Will he come back?" she said. "Pruitt, probably. And then?" He finally looked at her. "Then we deal with it," he said. "Same as today." Wren thought about we. She let it sit in her mind without prodding at it. "Okay," she said. The worst night came in late February. Emmett had gone down the mountain to trade for supplies, a trip he made every few weeks, always there, and back in a day, always before dark. He had not come back before dark. He had not come back at all by the time Wren put Lily to sleep, and she sat at the table in the lamplight, and told herself that trails got slow in new snow, that horses got tired, that there were a dozen reasonable explanations, and she believed none of them. She heard him at midnight, not his footsteps, something else. A dragging, uneven sound, and then the door, and she was already up, already across the room, and he came through the door sideways, one hand braced on the frame, and she saw it in the way he was moving before she saw the wound itself. He'd been cut, not by accident. The cut was in a place that put it outside the range of accidents, a long diagonal across his ribs that his coat was pressing against in a way that told her he'd been pressing it himself, keeping the pressure on, for however long it had taken him to get home. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She didn't ask what happened. She could see what happened. Pruett, or Pruett's men. She got the lamp close and opened his coat and looked at what was there, and it was ugly enough that she had to breathe carefully for a moment before her hands would work right. She had helped Thomas with worse. She had helped Thomas through a bad winter 3 years back, when the nearest doctor was 2 days gone in either direction, and she had learned then that your hands could do what they needed to do if you didn't let yourself think too far ahead of them. She got water. She got the cloth she needed, and the needle that she made herself thread twice before it took, and she worked with the lamp close, and Emmett very still, breathing in a way that told her it cost him something to stay that still, to keep his breath that even. Once he said, through his teeth, "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said, and kept working. After a while he stopped talking. She wasn't sure if that was good or not. She focused on the needle and the thread and the mechanics of it, the precise small work, and she tried not to think about how cold his skin was, or how much blood had gotten into his coat, or the particular quality of his silence. Not unconscious, but the silence of someone who has decided that protesting would embarrass them both. When she finished, she tied off the thread and sat back and let her hands rest in her lap for a moment and looked at them until they steadied. Emmett looked at the ceiling. His color was terrible. "Stay awake," she said. "Trying," he said. "Talk to me." A pause. "About what?" "Anything." She reached out and pressed the back of her hand against his forehead, checking. He was cold, but not feverish. "Not yet. Tell me about the 2 winters ago. What Thomas did for you." She hadn't planned to ask, but it was late, and she was frightened, and she needed to keep him talking, so the words came out before she'd thought them through. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "I was coming down the mountain sick," he said finally. "Late December. Bad timing. I made it to the road, and that was all I made it to." He stopped. "Thomas found me, brought me in, didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask what I was doing in that state in that weather." A short pause. "His wife was there," she said. "We weren't married yet." "Not until the spring, I know. He talked about you." Wren looked at him. "He talked about me to a stranger he'd found sick on the road. He talked about you the way a man talks when he can't quite stop himself," Emmett said, and there was something almost rueful in it. "I thought, this man is going to be all right. A man who talks like that about someone, he's got something worth getting home to." The lamp made a small sound. The stove settled. "He was all right," Wren said. "For a while." "I know," Emmett said quietly. "I'm sorry." She sat with that for a moment. "He never mentioned you," she said. "Not by name. I asked him not to." "I'm not." He shifted slightly, winced. "I don't do well with being owed things. I thought if you didn't know about it, we were even." "That's very strange math," Wren said. "Yes," he agreed. She checked the bandaging. It would hold. He would need to be still for several days, which she was already composing arguments for, because she could see by looking at him that he was the kind of man who would try to get up and fix something in the morning. "You'll stay in bed tomorrow," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. Whatever he saw in her face, he decided not to argue. "All right," he said. In the morning, Lily came to find him where he lay on the sleeping platform that Wren had insisted on, and Lily stood beside him with the solemnity of a very serious 4-year-old and said, "Mama fixed you." "She did," Emmett said. "She's good at fixing things," Lily said. Emmett was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. Lily nodded, as if this was confirmed. She climbed up to sit beside him, which he allowed, and she told him at length about a dream she'd had involving the cow, and he listened to every word of it. And through the open door, of the lean, to Wren could hear all of this. And she let herself hear it for a minute before she went back to the stove. The shoulder of the season turned somewhere in March. You could feel it before you could see it. Something in the quality of the afternoon light. Something in the way the snow on the roof began, very slightly, to soften. Emmett was up and moving within a week, which Wren, despite, had not been able to prevent, despite 2 well-reasoned arguments, though she noted. He moved more carefully than usual and West dole too, which she counted as a victory of a kind. Silas Pruett sent word twice more. Both times, Emmett read the notes and said nothing, and put them in the stove, and both times, Wren watched him do it and thought about the word we, and how he had used it without apparent deliberation, and how it had sat in her mind ever since. On an evening in late March, when the snow was pulling back from the south-facing slopes and the spruce trees were releasing the smell they released in thaw, green and sharp, and something underneath that was almost warm, Wren was sitting on the step, outside the cabin. Emmett came and sat beside her, not right beside her, the appropriate distance, but beside her. They sat for a while without talking. That was something she'd learned about him. Silence with Emmett was not absence. It was a kind of presence, a form of company that didn't demand anything from you. Then he said, "You could go to your parents, in Ontario, when the pass opens." She had thought about this. She had thought about it honestly, turning it over in the same careful way she turned over things that mattered. "I know," she said. "It would be easier," he said. "For Lily talks about you every day," Wren said. "She told me yesterday that you showed her how to set a snare." She demonstrated on her doll. A pause. "The doll is currently in captivity." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. She had catalogued every almost law so far, and she was collecting them the way you collect things you're only beginning to understand you need. She could learn those things somewhere else, he said. Careful, still giving her the out, still not pushing. "Emmett," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not going to Ontario," she said, a long quiet moment, the light going amber on the snow. "Okay," he said, "just that." But she was watching his face when he said it, and she saw what moved through it. Not quite relief, not quite gladness, not quite anything she had a word for yet, though she thought she might eventually find one. The first real day of spring came on a Tuesday. She knew it was spring, because when she went out in the morning, the air had a different weight to it. Not just cold, but alive with cold. And the creak she could hear from the south slope had gone from the trickle it made under the ice to a real voice, moving with intention. And, because Lily, who had been watching for this, ran outside in her boot without being reminded and stood in the mud at the edge of the clearing, with her arms out and her face up, just standing in it. Wren stood in the doorway and watched her daughter stand in the first real sun of the year. Emmett came up beside her, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, the solid reality of him. He was looking at Lily. Lily was turning in a slow circle in the mud with her arms still wide. "She's going to need new boots," Wren said. "By summer she'll have grown out of those. I can get the leather." He said. Of course he could. Of course that was the thing he said. She didn't look at him. She looked at Lily turning in the mud, in the spring sun, and she thought about the farm and the $6 in the tin and the morning Silas Pruett had walked up the track, and the night a stranger's horse had moved through the dark toward her barn, unhurried and deliberate, already knowing where it was going. She reached out and found his hand at his side and wrapped her fingers around it. He didn't move, didn't pull away. After a moment his hand closed around hers, carefully, the way he did everything, with intention, without ceremony. They stood in the doorway while Lily turned in the mud and the creek found its voice, and the mountain began, finally, to let the winter go.